Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa along with Adam Schrader. Shout out to all the homies, homegirls, homeboys, home trans, and all the other work from home individuals out there. Today we have a special guest on the show. As always, we have many special guests. This guest, his name is Dr. Stuart Shanker. He is a distinguished research professor emeritus of philosophy and psychology at York University in Toronto. He's the founder and CEO of the MEHRIT Centre and founder and chief scientific advisor at the Self-Regulation Institute. He is known as Canada's leading expert in the psychophysiological theory of self-regulation and is a #1 best-selling author of Help Your Child Deal with Stress and Thrive, The Transformative Power of Self-Reg, and the new book, Reframed, Self-Reg for a Just Society. Dr. Stuart Shanker, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thank you very much, Naresh.
Before we get started reading your bio, I don't know why this came to my mind, but it appears that you have a PhD or you do a lot of work in psychology. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you happen to know Jordan Peterson, or have you, spoken with him or followed his work?
Yes, and yes. Were there 3 questions there?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his, and I don't know why. I just thought of him while reading your bio.
Yeah, he's at the sister university in Toronto, Ontario.
Okay, yeah. I've read parts of his book, heard him speak many times just on the internet, and big fan, and hopefully he can get well soon. I know he's been dealing with something.
Yes, I understand he is getting better now.
Okay, excellent. Good to hear. So first, let's talk about self-regulation.
Yeah.
What is self-regulation?
So I'm guessing that when you wrote that question, you didn't realize it was a trick question, did you? It turns out that there are 447 different definitions of self-regulation. We know we did a study on it. So what we use is I trained at Oxford in England, and there they worked on the original definition, which was the word you were stumbling over, psychophysiological. And the original definition is real simple. All it is how we deal with stress. And there's a reason why that's such an important definition. And the reason is that self-regulation is something we start to do really from the moment we're born. The problem is we can do it in ways that are maladaptive, or we can do it in ways that are growth promoting. So you want an example of maladaptive? You're under a lot of stress. Say you're a kid, you're under a lot of stress, and you deal with your stress by getting glued onto your video game and won't come up for air until your parents finally pull the plug. When we say it's maladaptive, it's not really that the game's the problem. It's that the kid is trying to avoid whatever it is that's bothering him. And we know it's maladaptive because when you finally get him off the machine, he's even worse than he was when he sat down. So if you think about it, there's all kinds of ways that we as adults deal with stress in maladaptive ways. And what self-reg is all about is making that shift from maladaptive to growth. We call it growth promoting. And to do that, we have to understand all kinds of things like what stress is and when we're overstressed. So that's a kind of brief introduction to what is really one of the most important questions you could have asked.
I absolutely love, whenever I was looking over your website, your quote of there is no such thing as a bad kid. And that's something that I wholeheartedly agree with, that I've told people before. And it's kind of the same, along the same lines as there's no such thing as a bad employee, although you could debate that a little bit more than kid, in that you have to look at the situation that you're in as a parent or as an employee, as a boss or something, and ask yourself, what did I do to cause or to not prevent this from happening? So what are some of the things that you tell parents and tell employers, if you're working with them, about how to create an environment where you foster, the ability of kids or other people to kind of be their best selves in a lot of ways and know how to deal with the issues that are coming at them?
Adam, I got to tell you, there was an awful lot packed into what you just said, and but it's really, really important. Everything you said, I'm right there with you. I've worked with thousands and thousands of kids across Canada and now around the world. I've never seen a bad kid. But
there are kids who make bad choices, but they're not bad kids.
Who make bad choices. And then we want to understand why. And the same is true of employers or employees. We're doing an awful lot of work now. We work with schools and school boards across Canada, but over the past year, since COVID, we started to do an awful lot of work with people that are working from home. And the short answer to your question, which is a how question, how do we do this, is we have 5 steps. So you want me to go through the steps?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Okay, so this is really what Self-Reg is. It's we call it a 5-step method for dealing with stress. And the first step is called reframing. And reframing is huge. And it really is the point that Adam just made. We have to learn how to distinguish between misbehavior and stress behavior. These come from very different parts of the brain. The part that Naresh didn't mention is that I actually ran a neuroscience institute for many years. And this is what we studied. We studied what parts of the brain are engaged in misbehavior when a kid's, trying to get away with something, and which are stress behavior. And the reason why this is so huge is if you punish a kid for what is in fact stress behavior, you're going to make things 10 times worse. So then the obvious question that everyone always asks us is, well, how do I know? How do I know which is which? And I think that, as a parent, you sort of intuitively always know. But for, say, a teacher, there are tells. There are signs that kids that show us which state the kid is in. So when it's a stress behavior, the kid's voice changes. It'll go up a little bit. His speech changes. His eyes change. His skin color changes. There's all these signs. And with just a little bit of practice, you begin to pick up these, they're called, affect cues, body language. You pick these up very easily, very quickly, and you know right away if it's stress behavior, you're going to do something very different, and that's step 2. So what we're going to do with stress behavior is we're going to try to figure out what the stresses are. In order to sort of make the most of this step, you have to understand what stress is, because stress is not a bad thing. We need stress. Kids need stress. Stress is what makes us wake up in the morning. It makes us grow. We stress our bodies. So for a scientist, stress is anything that requires the brain to burn energy in order to maintain some sort of balance, to keep a system working. So the example that we give, this was the original example. In a furnace, so you set your thermostat to go on, or your Fahrenheit. So you set your thermostat to go on at say 68 and turn off at 71. In the original example, cold weather is a stress. It's a physical stress. We look at stress in 5 domains. These are things that trigger the brain to burn energy. So we look at physical stresses, temperature, noise, light, crowding. Then we look at emotional stresses, and that's the one that people generally think about. We look at cognitive stress. Believe it or not, cognitive stress is huge for teachers. And the best example, people ask, what's a cognitive stress? Well, math. Math is a cognitive stress. And it's a cognitive stress because it makes a lot of demands on a part of the brain called working memory. The next stress we look at is social stress, and that's easy, that's obvious. So if a kid's going to school, They're surrounded by social stresses. Right now, we are homeschooling both of my kids, both teenagers, and we've noticed a dramatic drop in their stress level. And I think it's because of removing the social stress. And then finally, we look at pro-social stress, what kind of person we want them to be, what kind of person they want to be, what kind of empathy they feel, and so on. So in our third step, what we're looking for now in stress behavior, that's when a kid is over, or we ourselves or someone we're working with are overstressed. It's the overstress that we're worried about. It's not that you shouldn't have stress in your life. It's that when there's too much stress, it affects things like your mood, your behavior, and your attention, your ability to learn or to execute or to solve problems. So we start to reduce stress in those 5 domains. We reduce the stresses that we can. The key step in all this is the 4th step, and that's called reflect. And the reason why that's key is we're seeing a generation now, kids, teens, young adults, who do not know what calmness is. They may know what the word, they may be able to define the word, but they don't know what it feels like in their body. So we can't do much work in Self-Reg of getting them back to calm if they don't even know what calm is. So we work very hard on the reflection side. And you can do this. We've done this in our lab. We worked with very young children that were on the spectrum. You can teach a 3-year-old with autism what it feels like to be calm. So basically, you can teach any kid this. And then the last one is respond. And really what we're looking for there is, okay, what are the changes I have to make in my life so that I don't slip into that overstressed state? What are the signs that I need to learn that tell me when I am starting to become overstressed? And that's the key. The key with a kid especially is we want to restore before there's a meltdown. We want to recognize the signs. We want to teach the kid to recognize the sign. Because once there's a meltdown, then you have to go into a whole different mode. But what we've learned is that kids not only can learn this, they want to learn it. And the reason is it feels awful physically, physiologically to lose control. So those are the 5 steps. And the last thing I'll say about this is, does it work? Yes. Does it always work? Yes. Is it easy? No.
Yeah. I was going to say, one of the things that I think a lot of people, when they say he's a bad kid or a bad this or bad that, is it's the easy way to get out of taking responsibility and actually focusing on the issue that's at hand. You can just say, oh, he's such a bad kid. He does bad things all the time, and I don't know what to do. So it's kind of the lazy man's way out.
Couldn't agree more. It's tragic for us because we work with those kids, right? And over and over, what we find is when we begin to figure out what the stress load is and, come up with ways with a kid or with an adult to manage it, you see a new kid, and that new kid's going to blow you away.
Yeah, and talking about working from home, how can parents working from home implement Self-Reg into their family culture?
So there's, Naresh, there's a lot of steps to that. I mean, I'm not being facetious, but really the best thing you can do is read the first of the books that you mentioned, which is written for parents, because this is really a knowledge-based thing. So you have to understand what the hell's going on here, what's going on in my kid's brain. But there are lots of things you can do to sort of have checks as you're going, so things don't get out of, they don't escalate, and you don't, you're suddenly shouting at each other, and you're saying, oh wait, Dr. Shanker said I'm supposed to be calm. I'm not calm. So one of the things that we get our parents to do is, whenever there's something going on and you're not sure, what the hell's causing this, you ask 2 questions. The first one is why, and the second one is why now. And these actually have a fabulous effect because they force you to pause. They interrupt that sort of stimulus response reaction. And with that pause, you begin to look. And we talk about, we want to see what's going on with our ears and not just with our eyes. We want to look at our child's behavior. We want to look at our own behavior. Now, this is obviously very important now because we are all overstressed. This is a really tough time for all of us. And so what we've been doing in all of our work is, we have these workshops that we do via Zoom, and every single one now we start off with the same thing: your self-reg. Your self-reg as a parent. So before I can talk about the kid or your own parent or a sibling, whoever you're working with, we have to work on our own self-awareness, our own self-reg. And there's a reason for this, and it's a really interesting one. You want to know the reason?
Absolutely.
Okay. This method, self-reg, is based on some really huge neuroscientific discoveries that have been made over the last 30 years. And there are three in particular, and I explain all these in the second book that you mentioned. There's a real interesting one, and we call it now, neuroscientists call it the interbrain. And what it tells us is that there is literally a brain-to-brain hookup between a part of our brain deep inside the subcortex, the limbic system, and somebody else's, okay? So we're designed as a species that we have this sort of a Bluetooth connection with another human being, especially with kids. The problem is this, that I can read whatever you want me to read, and I can memorize a script, and I can have word perfect what I'm supposed to say when my kid loses it. But if I'm irritated, or if I'm angry or agitated, that emotion comes from my limbic system, and that emotion is communicated by the interbrain. And when a kid is upset, what they process is not the words that you're using. They process what your limbic system is saying. They process that you're angry. They process that you're irritated. And so the reason why, one of the benefits of asking why and why now, is it gives me a chance to get in check with myself, to ground myself, to calm down, so that the limbic messages that I'm sending don't leak out. Leaking out means that I can't stop this. This is a deep system within the human brain. If I'm angry, that will come through in my tone of voice, my eye gaze, my gestures. So it's better not to be angry. So short version of all this, self-reg starts with me. I have to work on my own self-reg before I can do it with my spouse, with my kids, with whoever.
So are there different techniques you need to use? Like if you have a 5-year-old and then maybe a late teen, or maybe you're trying to help an adult deal with this, do the strategies differ, or is it kind of a one-size-fits-all thing?
I love the question. Yeah, they differ, all right. So, but again, it's a complicated question. All right, so the younger the child, the less we're going to use, language. Like we call these metacognitive terms, and they're real tough for a little guy, let alone for a teen. So what we do when we're working with young children is we'll use things like a doll. I'll give you an example. It's very tough. If you say to you've got, Adam, at least in your picture, you had a couple of little ones, right?
Yeah, I got a 5.5, twin 5.5, 8-year-old and 10-year-old.
Okay, so let's start with the 5.5-year-old. Okay, so here's something that never works. Ask him what he's feeling. That's a real tough question. But what we can do is with the young child, we look at things like, what are you feeling in your arms? What do your arms feel like? Do they feel like loose spaghetti, or do they feel like you got ants? So we're going to use language that they can sort of internalize. With really young kids, I mentioned we did this with 3-year-olds. We use dolls, and we hold up a Raggedy Ann doll and a Buzz Lightyear doll, and we say to them, who do you feel like? Do you feel like Buzz, or do you feel like Raggedy Ann? And in that way, we start to help them become aware of what's going on inside, where they are in their body. Now, the interesting part about your question is the following. So obviously, the older they get, the older they get, they're going, the more sophisticated our language, we can start to talk about this. We can talk about it the way I am now. But one of the things we discovered is, let's take now, your kids are still too young, but wait for 3 years, okay? And then this will be really relevant. When they become teens, we kind of think that, well, you're 13, you're 14 years old, you can control yourself. Come on now, what are you acting like that for? And so we reason with them. But when a child at any age becomes overstressed, and this is another part of the neuroscience that's absolutely fascinating, they regress in their brain to a very ancient system. So it's the fight or flight system. But not only do they go into fight or flight, when they go into that state, it shuts down their ability to process language. They don't hear what you're saying. They don't know what you're saying. So I can have now I've got an 18-year-old, so I can speak. I've got an 18-year-old, 16-year-old. I can speak from experience. When they lose it, I'm back to dealing with a 3-year-old. So the techniques I'm going to use, even though they're this, I got this hulking big guy, is I'm going to soothe. I'm going to, turn off his limbic alarm. I'm definitely not going to try to explain or argue when he's in this state. All I want to do in this state is turn off the alarm so that I can bring that thinking part of the brain back online. Think about the fights you guys are going through right now in your country. So the sad part about all this is, Naresh, you wrote something in one of your books. I was reading it and I thought, this is bang on. The problem is that if people are in this ancient brain state, communication breaks down. And if communication breaks down, we're screwed. So what we have to do is don't yell, don't shout, don't try to prove that the other person's an idiot. Instead, we need to calm everything down. Then, when we are calm, when that front part of the brain has come back online, now we can start to explain. I don't care if it's an adult or if it's a teenager. But the key here is it goes back to, reframing behavior, recognizing that when somebody's in this sort of, it's called cacostasis. It's a fancy term, but it means the systems are out of whack. So that's not the time to argue or explain. That's the time where everybody needs to just calm down. Let's take a break now, and let's get back to constructive, which was the point you made, by the way, Naresh. Get back to constructive problem solving, which we need to do together. Okay? That's a long answer to a tough question, actually.
Did you just admit that you read one of my books?
I did. I got very interested.
I think I know which book, based on what you just said. The political one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool that I guess you saw who the host of this show was and you were like, oh, let me do some research, and you found my books on Amazon.
That was exactly how it went.
Oh, wow. And that book piqued your interest out of all the other books? I have 5.
No, I was also interested in when you wrote, I got to admit, you got a knack for titles, 50 Shades of Marketing. I thought that's got to be like the #1 title I've seen. But
yeah, well, listeners, remember, get on our mailing list and you will get a free copy of 50 Shades of Marketing. Whip your business into shape and dominate your competition. So, wow, I'm honored that you actually took the time out as a very busy, well-known, renowned, distinguished research professor to look into my work. But
yeah, you're going to get a footnote.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Now, talking about stressors, we've already talked a little bit about stress and why stress is important. But what are what you call hidden stressors that affect people without them even knowing about it?
So that's a huge question, right? And one of the things we used to do was we do these large audience things, and when I asked them, what's a stress, and everybody put down the same thing. Time or money or, the obvious stressors. But in fact, remember where I started, stress is anything that makes us burn energy. So a hidden stressor is something that's burning up our energy without our realizing it. So I'll give you a really clear example. Sweet and soft drinks are a hidden stress. Now you can say, well, how's that? Well, the reason is that one of the jobs of this system I've been talking about, this system deep inside the brain. So within it, there's a sort of master control system called the hypothalamus. And one of the jobs it has is it monitors blood glucose levels. As you know, there's an awful lot of sugar in these drinks. So the problem is that if you have too much blood glucose, the hypothalamus triggers a response to get rid of it because it's actually a toxin if there's too much sugar in the system. So it starts to burn, and it goes through a chemical process which burns an enormous amount of energy just to keep your blood levels safe. Now stop and think for a second about a kid, right? So we all know that kids get hyped up on sugar, whatever. In fact, what's going on here is pretty serious because we only have, the brain it runs on glucose. It's like one of those new cars that runs on ethanol. We're a glucose running machine. And we have especially a kid has a limited amount of glucose. So if through drinking or whatever, they have way too much sugar in their system, the brain starts to burn off. It has to burn way more energy than it took in. The problem is that's using up the gas tank. That's using up the fuel. And now they don't have enough glucose left over for what they really need, which is, let's say, learning or paying attention. These are very expensive, glucose expensive processes. So, the short answer here is read the book. We talk an awful lot about what the hidden stresses are in our life. It's not enough to figure out what are the obvious ones. What we have to now figure out is what are the things that, say, my kid is doing. And as a parent, you sort of know, right? You know that the kid's agitated. You know there's something that's not right. So now what we want to do is we want to figure out the behavior is stress behavior, showing me that he's dipped way too low into his reserves. Now I want to know is why is he burning so? Just let me give you one more example. This study just blew me away. It's a study that was done in Sweden. And so what they looked at was kids that were having a lot of trouble in school, and they found the common pattern was they were staying up late playing violent video games. And it turns out that when you play one of these games, it fires up the amygdala, it fires up this system deep inside the brain, which is looking for enemies, because it's an old system. It's a stupid system. It doesn't know it's just a game. Okay, so then mom comes along and says, turn off your lights, go to sleep, it's 10 o'clock now. It takes 6 to 8 hours for that system to finally turn off. In that 6 to 8 hours, that kid is burning energy because his ancient brain is telling him there's a threat. So it's keeping him in that heightened state of vigilance. So there's a case where, here's a stressor that turns up the next morning. Now, the parents will say to us all the time, well, what should I do? If he shouldn't be playing the game right before he goes to sleep, what should I do? And the answer is a real simple one there. Read a book. Reading is a naturally calming activity. So what we're looking at with hidden stressors are what are the stressors, but also how can we replace this maladaptive way of dealing with stress? How can we replace it with something that really generates calmness and at a cellular level restoration?
Now, a lot of the people right now, you're locked down, you're living alone, you're spending most of your time alone. How do you recognize the need to work on yourself, without an outside person looking in and saying, hey, something's wrong, you need to deal with this a little bit better? How do you recognize it inside of yourself?
Adam, this is like the 5th time you've done this. That's a real good question. This is a problem today, right? And I want to explain it first in terms of how the brain works. So the brain has a hierarchy of dealing with stress. We call it a hierarchy because it really goes from ancient ways of dealing with stress to the most, in neuro terms, the most recent developments in our brain. The most recent development, the most important development, is something called social engagement. The number one, the by far best way of dealing with stress is through social engagement, through that interbrain I was talking about. So one of the things we see is that, say you got a teen that is overstressed, the first thing they're going to do is they are going to try to block social engagement. They go into these more primitive mechanisms. So there's a real neat story in the Self-Reg book about one of the cases that I worked with where, you very slowly have to reestablish social engagement. So your question is obviously, you're really targeting what is a huge problem today, and that is the isolation. What we're suffering from is this breakdown, these obstacles to social engagement. And in many ways, a lot of the behaviors that we're seeing, like, rushing down to the beach before you should, these were really maladaptive ways of dealing with the stress. It's like the kid who eats the marshmallow to get rid of the stress. People were overstressed by being alone, so they did the one thing they shouldn't. So what we've done is, in our organization, we've started to hold we do these monthly Twitter chats, and they've gone through the roof. People need contact. Now, one of the interesting things is it doesn't have to be what's called proximal contact. I have a real good sense right now what you two guys are like, and I can't even see you. But through tone of voice, we can do amazing things. And when we teach this stuff, we actually use videos that show the effect of voice. So there has to be some way of hooking in. But the real problem, I think, let me rephrase that. One of the big problems that we're seeing with people that are now working from home that weren't before is they have to reframe their own behavior. So I'll give you one example. We just did a big study on procrastination. Now, procrastination is one of the things you beat yourself up over, right? So you're working at home and you've got these deadlines, and it's real hard to meet your deadlines. And then before you know it, it's 8:00 that night, and might as well have, go get the bottle of wine because I didn't get any work done today. But procrastination, it turns out, is actually a way of responding to stress. It's a mode of self-regulation, but it's maladaptive. And it's maladaptive because what it does, it creates greater stress for you the next day when you're trying to get back down to work. So one of the things that we work on over and over, obviously we want to have contact, but on your own, you need to understand that I am overstressed. That's the first thing. Why am I overstressed? What are the stresses that I can reduce? So in a case like procrastination, the healthy way of dealing with it isn't to beat yourself up, isn't to, it's not to in any way see yourself as somehow weak. Rather, it's to see that you are overstressed. And now what we're going to do is we do what's called a stress inventory. I'm going to become a stress detective. What are the stresses in my life that I can reduce? And then what happens, if I can bring the stress load down, is the procrastination naturally resolves. It wasn't a case of not having enough willpower. Rather, it's a very different part of the brain that was working, that was basically blocking me because it was trying to avoid yet more stress. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
That makes sense. Dr. Stuart Shanker, Distinguished Research Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and Psychology at York University in Toronto, author of the new book, Reframed, Self-Reg for a Just Society. The website is self-reg.ca, self-reg.ca, as well as selfregglobal.com, selfregglobal.com, and selfregulationinstitute.org. That's selfregulationinstitute.org. Dr. Shanker, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners, or anything else you want to promote?
I don't want to promote, but I want to thank you guys. I like doing this. I like the work that you're both doing. I really do. I just wrote a big blog, and I was explaining how, when I was growing up, and so I'm Canadian. When we were growing up, we studied American history before we studied Canadian. For us, America really represented freedom, democracy, justice. And you're going through, you are a society that is the sort of definition of a society that's overstressed. But I believe in you guys. And we need to come out of this stronger than ever. And it's shows like this that are essential now, so that we change, the sort of old polemics. And now I want us to shift now into constructive problem solving. And what we've seen up here is that once we can change the focus, once we can change the conversation, start talking about stress loads, what we find is we can turn around a business, we can turn around a school, we can turn around a family. So my final message for you is it's a little episode that happened to me. I do work all over the country, and one day I was doing a lecture up in Yellowknife. And Yellowknife is capital of the Northwest Territories, and plane landed, and the pilot comes on and he says, bundle up, folks, it's a balmy minus 42 out there. So trust me, that's very, very cold. So they drive me to the venue, and they had to change it to a theater. And it was packed. It was SRO. And so, I'm explaining, I'm talking, but all at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is crazy. Like, it's minus 42. What are all these people doing here? So at the very end of the night, I said to them, guys, you have to tell me something. Why are you all here? It's cold. And a little voice up at the top balcony shouts down. He says, it's because you give us hope. And that's what your country needs now. And that's what you guys got to do. That's the message you guys got to share.
Wow, thanks for sharing that message, and thanks for the kind words about our show. We really appreciate that, Dr. Stuart Shanker. Again, the website's self-reg.ca, selfregglobal.com, and selfregulationinstitute.org. And to all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this interview, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on your podcasting platform, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. Leave us a review. Email us at hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com with a screenshot of that review. And I will send you a free copy of one of my other books, not 50 Shades of Marketing, which is available to everyone, but one of the other books, maybe the political book, Trump book, that we talked about earlier. And again, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And to everyone, thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate you. We've come a long way from the 18 listeners we had a year ago. And until next time, keep on working from home.